So all month, I have been talking about domestic violence awareness, and because it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and each Thursday I've been touching on a different topic within the context of domestic violence. And tonight, what I want to talk to you about and put some things on your radar about is family violence and what it looks like, what it feels like, how to deal with it, and the prevalence of it, right? And really challenging each of you to take responsibility and accountability for breaking the cycle of violence in any number of ways that I'll definitely put some things on your radar. So, what is family violence, right? You would think that that's where we're fighting in the family. But the more technical definition of family violence is when somebody uses abusive behavior to control or harm a member of their family or someone with whom they have an intimate relationship. If this is you, if you are a victim of family violence, please know that you can call 911 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1 800 799 7233. Again, that's 911 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1 800 799 7233. You can do touch tone dial at 800 787 3224 or text START to 88788. Again, that is if you or someone that you know is a victim of family violence. It is October, and that means it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's an opportunity for each of us to join forces to raise awareness of the far-reaching impact of domestic violence. The reality of it is, folks, is that Everyone Knows Someone campaign focuses on the theme that every one of us knows someone who is affected by domestic violence, whether you realize it or not, whether you're aware of it or not. As I've done each week thus far, I'm going to share with you some things to look for. Some of you may speculate. You may be going, I'm not sure, but sort of, kind of. But a big part of you having heightened awareness is going to be your ability to notice what you're noticing. You have to pay attention to your surroundings. You have to pay attention to the people that you're interacting with, particularly those that you profess to love and care about, and be deliberate and intentional in noticing what you notice and make a mental note. So there's some statistics that I want to share with you on family violence, because one of the things that I have found in doing my work as a couple, marriage, and family therapist all these years is that people of all ethnic groups and racial groups are very good at dismissing things. They're very good at sweeping things under the rug. They're very good at justifying or making light of what's looking them straight in the face, and they will explain it away, and oftentimes that ends up being to the detriment of those that are up close and personal and being impacted by the violence. So when we look at family violence within the context of intimate partner violence, in the United States, nearly half of women and more than a quarter of men have experienced intimate partner violence at some point in their lives. This includes physical violence, sexual violence, and stalking. Children exposed to domestic violence. This is a doozy. For those of you that tune in to interact with me on a regular basis, when it comes to abuse, neglect, and maltreatment of children. That's a hot spot for me. It's something that makes my head spin, green foam come out my mouth, and depending on what I hear and see, I'm liable to have emotional Tourette's. But children exposure to domestic violence estimates suggest that 10 to 20% of children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year, and up to a third are exposed at some point in their childhood or adolescence. That's 10 to 20%, too many kids being exposed. When you look at race and domestic violence, Black female residents are more than 3 times more likely to be a victim of domestic violence than white female residents. American Indian and Alaskan Native residents have the second highest victimization rate. When you look at the impact that domestic violence in the context of family violence has on our health, domestic violence can cause worsening psychological and physical health, decreased quality of life, and decreased productivity. In some cases, it can lead to mortality. When you look at family violence within the context of the justice system, the Bureau of Justice Statistics provides statistics on the nature and extent of family violence, as well as family violence that is reported to police and persecuted. Family and domestic violence can include economic, physical, sexual, emotional, and psychological abuse of children, adults, or elders. If you or someone that you know is a victim of family violence or domestic violence in any relationship capacity, please call 911 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Or again, the touch-tone dial, 800-787-3224, or you can text START to 88788. One of the things that I want to talk to you about tonight is the causes of family violence. And before I take a deeper dive into that, one of the things that I want to talk about is family violence that arises under the premise of biblical practice. Spare the rod, spoil the child. And my husband and I have had numerous conversations about this because, and I can't even say that it's particularly Black people or brown people or what have you. There are, I would probably say, most racial or ethnic groups to some degree subscribe to utilizing corporal punishment to discipline their children. But it's called corporal punishment. And I remember when I was in grad school, one of my professors, who was also an ordained minister, she went in hot and heavy on how spare the rod, spoil the child does not mean the abuse or maltreatment of your children. As a child of color that grew up in a home and in a family system, and truth be told, in a community, and in a school system that practiced corporal punishment, I will tell you that there's so much that doesn't get taken into consideration, and I believe that a lot of people have done an outstanding job of misinterpreting spare the rod, spoil the child. What's not taken into consideration, and what I don't hear a lot of conversation about, is this understanding that violence breeds violence. And what I mean by that is, if you are using corporal punishment to discipline your children or your partner, because let's keep that real, that happens too. If you're using corporal punishment as a means to discipline, then you're also teaching violence as a means to solve problems or to resolve conflict or to address inappropriate behavior. And what I can tell you is, having grown up in a family where, we were taught to respect our elders, and children are seen and not heard, and because I said so, and, do as I say, not as I do, what ends up happening is it sends mixed messages to children. And then you wonder why children are confused. You beat the brakes off of your kid, you're borderline abusing, or you're actually abusing, and then you are producing, in some cases, children that are extremely angry, that are extremely enraged, and they're either out in the community or they're in the school system, and perhaps even in their own relationships when they get old enough to have a romantic relationship, and they're behaving violently. Well, where did they learn that from? And I think that there's not enough responsibility and accountability taken around the fact that violence is a learned behavior. But here's the flip side of that coin. Just because you learned it doesn't mean you have to replicate it. I think anybody that knows me intimately knows that because corporal punishment was something that I was subjected to in very harsh forms growing up, that my commitment was always going to be that when I had children, I was going to find healthy and productive ways to discipline them in a way that didn't promote violent behavior in my children. And as a result of that, and I've always said three, my son may disagree, I can recall 3 times ever in my son's entire life where I utilized corporal punishment to discipline him, and it wasn't severe corporal punishment. By no stretch would anybody have said, well, maybe once. I did punch him in his chest one time when he was a teenager and flex him. But I own that, right? And I can say with all honesty that that was the last time that I ever put my hands on him, because I didn't like that I responded to him as aggressively as I did. And my commitment to him when he was growing up was that I wasn't going to be beating on him to get him to do what I wanted him to do. So I parented using firm boundaries and non-corporal punishment consequences in the rare event that he didn't do what I asked him to do, or he didn't do what was expected of him. But I did not practice corporal punishment because I didn't want to produce a violent child. I will tell you, and I've said before, that, one of my biggest work-ons for many years was learning how to tame the monster within. I was subjected to so much violence when I was growing up, not just directly onto me, but growing up in a family where there was a great deal of violence, and growing up in a community where there was escalating violence, that on top of all of the other trauma that I was dealing with, that violent nature was ingrained in me. And for many, many years, I was in actuality a very, very, very violent, aggressive, hostile person. And that wasn't something that I was proud of, and it wasn't a behavior that I wanted to continue, because I recognized that I had the ability to break the cycle of family violence, at least where my relationships were concerned. And many of you have heard me say before that I ended up in a couple of relationships where violence was a way of life, and I just did not want that to be my continual story. So I recognized that I had to take the necessary action to break those core negative interaction patterns and to get to a place and space of being healthier, so that I wasn't solving everything based on violent interactions and outbursts. So when we look at what causes family violence, the first thing that we have to take into consideration is that the use of violence is an intentional choice. Whether it's you as the parent choosing to use corporal punishment to discipline your child, or you as the partner being abused, you getting to the point where you start fighting back, or if you're the abusive partner. Or, quite frankly, I was having a conversation with a client before I came into session about working within those family systems where folks fight each other like they're fighting strangers in the street. That is an example of family violence that is a multi-generational issue that has carried over from generation to generation, that the family system is making the choice over generations to use violence as a way to coerce or to gain control or to express disapproval with how they've been spoken to or handled or whatever the case may be. But here's the thing that you must know. The responsibility for the violence always lies with the abuser. So I can say, one of the things that I've said to people before is that you do have to take responsibility and accountability for what comes out of your mouth. Not suggesting that what comes out of your mouth is justification for the person to abuse you. However, you have to know your audience. Responsibility says we have to gain understanding regarding behaviors that can increase risk, behaviors that can increase the likelihood that somebody who is not dealing with a full deck is going to respond to us violently. So don't, folk don't send me crazy emails talking about Dr. Pitts, you victim blaming. I would never. But this is what I'm saying. I'm gonna give it to you raw, because that's how Dr. Pitts gets down. When I was younger, I lived on the edge. I was a risk taker. I was a rule breaker. I was a hardhead. I was rebellious. I was defiant. I was the polar opposite of what I was raised to be for a variety of reasons. And I take responsibility and accountability for those behaviors. But here's the valuable lesson that I learned. My father said to me one day, he said, baby, you're down on your hands and knees begging for somebody to whoop your behind. He was talking about an intimate partner. And I'm like, oh my God, Daddy, why would you say that? And don't nobody have no right to be putting their hands on me and this, that, and the third. He said, baby girl, everybody's not sane. Everybody's not dealing with a full deck. Everybody is not going to just walk away and let you saying any old foul thing out your mouth to them, or you doing any old foul thing out your your behavior. Everybody's elevator is not going to the top floor. His concern for me was that I was engaging in behavior that could have potentially put me in harm's way because I was breaking rules when it comes to respect. I was breaking rules when it comes to valuing the relationship and all of the healthy parts of it. That's what he meant. He wasn't suggesting for a moment that it would be okay for me to be beat up and knocked around because of something that I said or did. But what he was saying was, everybody don't play fair. And what I have said, because I've got some family members who have treacherous mouths, And what I have said to family members and friends and clients, take responsibility and accountability for what comes out of your mouth so that you're not increasing the risk of having your head knocked off. And oh, by the way, that goes both ways. Because there's women out here that's just as unstable as there are men. There's women who fight, who initiate the fight. There's men who initiate the fight. There's siblings who initiate the fight. Heck, I've worked within family systems where the parent was stepping to the adult child and throwing hands. And the adult child was about to fight the parents. Dysfunction. That's all I'm saying, is that it's dysfunction. But no matter what, the abuser, the person who is perpetrating the violence, is always going to be where the responsibility falls. But you do have the ability to decrease your risk. Secondly, perpetrators of family violence will often make excuses for their behavior. If you hadn't said, if you hadn't did. I was working with a client who shared with me that there was an altercation with another family member, and the family member was adamant that the other family member was going to listen to what they had to say. And in an effort to do that, the family member who was the aggressor, I'm going to say lured the more docile family member, lured them into a room, shut the door, and stood in front of the door and wouldn't let the family member out the room. And I started laughing. I said, oh, how did that get handled? And what the individual said was, it took a whole lot to maintain the composure and to be able to assert oneself, to be able to calmly and safely get out of that situation. And I said, I applaud you. I said, I absolutely positively applaud you. I said, because in my family, the room would have been tore up. Would have been fighting. 30 plus years ago. You gonna lock me in a room and not let me out and think you the boss of me? And we're all adults, and you gonna listen to what I got to say, and your answer to that is to lock me in a room? Whole room tore up, ambulance called, all that's happening. But that was 30 plus years ago. And my clinical recommendation and the discussion that we had was the importance of imposing boundaries and the consequences for violating those boundaries, because here was the $1 million question that I asked. What do you suppose made that family member think that it was okay to do that to you? And my client sort of sat back and then was like, you know what, Dr. Pitts? That's been our relationship dynamic our whole life. So what that conveyed to me clinically is boundary violations have been a way of life in this family system. That a family member, or anybody, but in this instance, a family member attempted to exercise control over the other family member who wasn't doing what they wanted done the way they wanted it done. So people blame you. It's your fault that I came to you. You shouldn't have said this to me. You shouldn't have done that to me. I snapped because I'm so stressed out. If you wasn't doing this, if you wasn't doing that. But the reality of it is, each of us gets to choose every day if we are going to demonstrate self-control and self-discipline and take responsibility and accountability for our behavior. Blaming others for your violent behavior, simply put, is your way of avoiding taking responsibility for your actions. And if you're the aggressor, no matter what the other person is saying or doing, yes, I address them. They have to decrease risk. But at the end of the day, the abuser's responsibility is to maintain self-control and self-discipline and to not perpetrate violence on their family members. What I'm about to say may shock you, and I have this debate at times with clients because, and I've said it before on lives, right? People say, well, Dr. Pitts, I just can't help it. She makes me so mad. He makes me so mad. They make me so mad. I'm sick and tired of this. And what I say is this. If you can get angry or frustrated about something at work or at the bank or at the grocery store or wherever you are, and you are able to demonstrate enough self-control and self-discipline that you're not knocking your boss's head off or your coworker's head off, you're not tearing up the office and throwing stuff, you're not slapping the bank teller, you're not throwing all the stuff in the floor on the conveyor belt at the grocery store. Don't tell me that you can't help it, because you can. You are choosing the day, the time, the hour, the situation, and the circumstance to not demonstrate self-control. You have the ability to take the necessary action to control yourself, but you don't. So you have to ask yourself, why am I okay acting like a lunatic? Why am I okay acting like a wild banshee? Why am I okay acting like a rabid pit bull when it comes to my children, my partner, my parents, my siblings, my friends? Why am I good with that? Something else that I want you to think about is a term that we use called social enablers of family violence. And my question to you is, are you a social enabler? What do I mean by that? When we think about the use of violence is a choice that each of us makes, there are broader social and community factors that can enable family violence to occur and allow the person who commits family violence to excuse or minimize the harm that they're causing to their family. And the factors can be, like I already touched on, the spiritual piece, right? It can be beliefs and structures in our society that enable certain people with more power or privilege or resources to exert violence and power and control. Police brutality would fall under the social enabling of family violence. And what I mean by police brutality is I'm not talking about police brutality perpetrated on the common citizen. I'm talking about police officers or military personnel or judges or attorneys or other people in power who get away with abusing their family members because of their role in society. And I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it personally. I've seen it professionally where, you know, we hear, for example, where the police are concerned, it's the blue wall, right? You know, when you're a part of the judicial system and you've got a certain amount of privilege, that you get consideration, that you get a pass on some things. And I see, because a total confession, I binge watch real crime TV like 2020 and Disappeared, and shows like that are addressing real criminal acts that have occurred in this country and in some instances other places around the world. And a lot of the ones that I have seen over the years, when there have been people involved that held positions of authority, it was excused. Like one of the greatest ones that comes to mind is down in Florida. There was a police officer on the police force down there, and there were two ethnic minority men in particular that he had stopped for traffic violations, a black man and a Latino man, who both came up missing. And it was such a huge case that it gained national attention, and Tyler Perry became involved and offered a huge reward in the whole 9 yards. And that police officer eventually was fired from the police force and moved and, went on doing other things. But who knows how many other people may have come up missing at his hands, because before it finally came down to them putting him under the magnifying glass and thoroughly investigating him because of his position in the police department, he couldn't have possibly been a killer. He couldn't have possibly been responsible for their disappearance. The other thing that's important to note is gender inequity. And what I mean by that is this unequal distribution of power because of where resources and opportunity between men and women. And we live in a society where we see at times these rigid gender roles that have resulted in women being less valued in society, which has created a social environment that enables and excuses violence against women. But the flip side of that is that when you look at marginalized populations, when you look at black people and brown people, one of the other issues that arises when it comes to inequity is because you're a poor person of color, then the 911 call can come in, but is it taken seriously? I know in New Jersey, if you call 911 due to a domestic dispute, both parties are going to jail. I actually don't know what that is in Texas. I probably need to investigate that just for clinical purposes. But it's certainly in some states, if 911 is called, regardless of whether you're the perpetrator or the victim, both or all parties involved are going to be brought into the police station. So you have to look at the role that gender plays. And that touches on what I said last week too, because I have seen instances where the woman was the perpetrator, but because she was the woman and turned on the waterworks and, sang the sad song, that the man ended up being the one taken into custody, when in actuality, all he was trying to do was keep her off of him. And that's why I say to people all the time, particularly when it comes, really any relationship dynamic, everybody needs to keep their hands to themselves. Violence does not have to be a way of life. It does not have to be that you use violence to solve problems and to resolve conflict. When we look at the other inequities that are instrumental in contributing to family violence, we have racism, we have classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and other forms of discrimination that enable social conditions and contribute to family violence. And these forms of discrimination intersect with each other and gender inequality, which often results in those that are a part of these marginalized populations being more likely to experience higher levels of family violence because the measures are not in place to keep them safe because they are a part of this marginalized and disenfranchised group. If you or someone that you know is a victim of family violence, you can call 911 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. So when you think about what do? How do I go about getting the help to break this cycle? As the reality of it is, we know, particularly for those of us that are people of color, calling the police is like, I don't know, because we've seen instances where 911 has been called and you ended up dead at the hands of the police. So I'm not behaving as if I don't realize that that is a risk. However, it's a minimal risk in comparison to you actually being able to receive the help that you need. So when you look for survivors or services for survivors of family violence, shelters provide temporary housing and services for both male and female adults and children who have experienced family violence. Non-residential support centers provide the same services, but they don't provide emergency sheltering. The plus side of the shelters, whether they be emergency or non-emergency, is that they're free and you don't have to adhere to income eligibility requirements to be able to get into them. You have temporary 24-hour shelters that are available in most geographic areas. You have the 24-hour hotline, which is 1-800-799-SAFE, or in other words, 1-800-799-7233. When it comes to the hotline, you can get immediate intervention through safety planning. You can have understanding and support in the person that you're communicating with. They will provide you with additional information about shelter center services, and they can also provide referral support to get you connected with other services that may be available to you. There's also legal assistance, and a lot of people don't realize the legal challenges that arise when you're trying to remove yourself from a violent family situation. The legal help can be instrumental in helping you to get greater clarity on what your legal options are. In other words, what your rights are. It can connect you to advocacy so that you have someone that can be there with you to help you to navigate the legal steps that you need to take to get out of that situation and to get yourself safe and stable. And they will also help you if you are in a situation where you have to go to court. They will accompany you and provide support for you when it comes to court. There's also additional assistance in obtaining medical care, emergency transportation, training for help and seeking employment, community education, and a wealth of other services. The bottom line here, folks, is violence does not have to be your way of life. It does not have to be your prison. It doesn't. There are resources that are available to you. There is support that is available to you. There is hope that is available to you. And I will tell you, and I need you to really hear my heart when I say this, because I've experienced it personally, but I also see it a lot in my work. When I was working at the Domestic Violence Intervention Shelter, one of the persistent complaints that I would often hear from people that were coming into the shelter. They would fuss and complain about having to share a TV with other residents in the shelter. They would complain about, having to be on a rotation of when to use the kitchen and preparing meals and those sorts of things. They would complain about the limitations that were placed upon them as far as their comings and goings. And though all of those complaints were understandable, at the end of the day, your life is more important. Your life is worth the short-term sacrifices for the long-term gain of your freedom and your safety and your stability. And it literally blew my mind that folks were so bent out of shape about the minor inconveniences that oftentimes those would be the very reasons that they would choose to go back into a very violent situation. And what I say to you is that does not have to be your story. There is no TV show worth losing your life over. There's no shower time or, oh, I just need to bake some brownies right now. None of those superficial things are more important than your life, your safety, your health, and your stability. And that's what I want to leave you with tonight. You are worth the sacrifices that need to be made to get out of the violent situation that you're in. Be a safe haven for someone. Remind them that they are worthy of being safe, of being healthy, of being stable. Remind them that they are worth not having to sleep with one eye open, and they are worth not having to walk on eggshells. Thank you for tuning in tonight. I will see you next week. Have a good night, everybody.